our second half. You're listening to America's Voice Now. My name is Michael Evans. I'm your host. You know, I've steered clear of addressing this issue of Zimmerman and Trayvon Martin because I believe its real purpose is to distract and divide America. You know, I talked yesterday about the unconscionable legalization of the use of propaganda in the United States of America. Legalized just in the 2013 National Defense Authorization Act. But I got to tell you, it's been in play for a long time. It's just now official. And, you know, you have to realize that a lot of what's going on in the media today, I mean, if you look at almost any news organization, predominantly the top 6 or 8, you're going to find that news of Zimmerman and Martin fill their websites. That is their sole topic of conversation. It is the national dialogue, and it is for a reason. They don't want you to recognize that we're outside of our debt limit requirement and the government is operating a fraudulent scenario, as I just talked about in our last segment. That the Treasury and the Federal Reserve are in an absolute unmitigated conspiracy to hide the truth from the American people, that we are bankrupt, that we are in default as we speak. Moreover, they don't want you to recognize all of the other facts that are surfacing of all of the scams and the scandals that are rocking this administration. The IRS scandal, which nobody's talking about. The NSA scandal, which nobody is talking about. The Fast and Furious scandal, which nobody is talking about. Because they're all talking about Zimmerman and Martin. Meanwhile, the nation is being split and divided by a press which is determined to make sure that they foment violence, riots, and confusion and chaos. In other words, the propaganda is already in play. And now the DOJ comes out. Eric the Traitor Holder, who's already, held in contempt, criminally and civilly, for refusing to answer questions and hiding paperwork from Congress on Fast and Furious, has the unmitigated gall to come out and keep the fire burning by saying he's opening a DOJ investigation into a federal civil rights act against Zimmerman. So I want to explore that a little bit. I'm going to take a couple of quick calls on it because I know you folks probably have some input on this issue. But I got to tell you, the real problem here is that he knows that there's zero chance of this. The FBI did an investigation and interviewed 36 witnesses before the Zimmerman trial even happened to ascertain whether or not there was racial intent. And they concluded there wasn't. So his own FBI will decry his investigation. The point of an investigation, however, is that it can stay open indefinitely. It makes Zimmerman now live in terrorism from his own government, not to mention terrorism from the generic population who are already out there threatening to kill him and his family and everything down to his family dog and cat. And meanwhile, they know it won't go anywhere. But it continues to drive the partisanship, the racial divide, and the violence. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is exactly what they want. Go ahead, caller.
Yes, Michael. Assuming what you say is true, and I have no reason to doubt you. I've read some of the same stuff myself, and I think you're a pretty credible guy. The only possible solution is for America to pull our resources inside her border, repudiate our debt, and hang on for dear life.
I couldn't agree more.
Because basically that's what it is, and if we don't do that, our children down to 10 generations from now will still be paying off our mistakes.
But the problem with this is that
the world will fall.
The only way that we can accomplish that is by removing those people who are currently in power through a peaceful method. And the only way for that to be accomplished is for Americans to rise up in such great numbers, in such massive civil disobedience, peaceful civil disobedience, that it is undeniable that they have lost control of the situation.
I hope that's possible. Even such disobedience takes place, it in itself will generate its own turmoil.
Oh, I don't disagree. But recognize the alternative is to slide into fiscal oblivion and political oblivion, because what we're doing now is we are literally entering the final phases of the descent into totalitarianism in the United States. And totalitarianism covers all the sins: socialism, communism, Marxism, fascism, ism, right? So,
and people talk about this, Michael, and I'm not sure they realize how they talk about it blithely, like it just rolls off their tongue easily. But what they're talking about is all the possible onset of a second dark age. I mean, it's that serious.
Oh, it most assuredly is. I mean, you have to recognize that most of what they're doing right now is literally toying around with the future of humankind. They are playing games and experimenting like mad scientists with the future of humankind. And I mean that in its most dire intent. In other words, if the fiscal sovereignty or if the fiscal balance of the United States collapses, and the loss of freedom and liberty and the principles of republicanism in government collapse, there is no more pillar left to hold up the roof of liberty on the planet.
Exactly,
which
right.
will end up turning the entire globe into a totalitarian wasteland, which will inevitably, over a relatively short period of time, become such an oppressive regime that we will fall under the most draconian abuses that we have ever seen in the history of mankind. And it may be decades or centuries before humankind is able to break free of that, if ever. And that's the simple truth.
And we won't have the resources that we had before in order to build back up.
Of course not.
And we've expended them.
Of course.
We've expended a lot of them.
And not only have we expended them, but, they're being held by tyrants in abeyance for their own personal use. You have to recognize that what we're looking at here is a complete and total loss of all technology, all brilliant minds. I mean, this is a cataclysm that is global in its proportion. Because when these totalitarianists grab and seize power in a final, ultimate, globalist oligarchy, what you're going to have is a great purge. And what's going to disappear are free thinkers, the intellectuals, the academics, the scientists, and what you will end up with is a teeming mass of lemmings who will soon turn about and eat each other. I mean, it's just, this isn't hard to contemplate. It is hard to accept. I mean, it almost sounds like the plot for a Hollywood blockbuster, but it's the simple truth. It is the simple truth. Well, thank you for your input. I appreciate it. And thanks for your call.
All right, Michael.
All right, we'll talk to you soon. What the DOJ is doing here by organizing, and by the way, it just came out the other day that they are actually organizing, busing, and even funding protests to agitate the communities in race rallies. The DOJ is funding race riots? Or they call them rallies, but let's be candid about what they really are. You see, the problem here, people, is that everything that this administration does is so abjectly partisan and so driven with their goal and agenda of fomenting revolution, but not replacing themselves, just creating chaos for chaos' sake. because crisis is the rallying cry of the tyrant. And so once the crisis begins, they get to stand up and say, we have the solution for this. It's total abdication of all liberty for the sake of safety. And these people know better. They know better. They are willfully committing crimes against humanity. You know why? Because they understand that true justice is not social justice. Justice is about the protection of the one from the whims of the many. Justice isn't about satisfying public opinion. Justice isn't about acceding to the gang mentality of the majority. It's not about assisting and inciting and encouraging violence and terrorism against a small or an individual. I mean, how small a minority can Zimmerman be? He's a minority of one. That is the entire principle of Republican government. Not party government, Republican as in a principle, not a party. In other words, the whole idea of a republic is that the minority, regardless of whether it's 1 or 1,000 or 1,000,000, is protected from the whims of the majority, the gang mentality. And inciting and encouraging violence and terrorism is simply a tool being used by those in power whose sole function is supposed to be the protection of that minority. Go ahead, caller. Welcome to the show. Caller, you're on the air.
Hello.
You're on the air.
All right. Just a little note here about the spending that our government does, and of course, all in our name, right, for our best interest.
Oh yeah.
Hillary Clinton. She's being selected. As we know from this last election, when she stepped down, she got the State Department. They spent $63,000 just on Facebook. I know it's just like a sneeze. It's probably their coffee bill.
If I'm not mistaken, I think that actual number was 10 times that.
You're kidding. 630? Well, I heard 63.
No, I believe it was 630, but let me just check it. I don't want to make a false statement.
But, think about it for a second. $5,000 a month. They just spent this. It's like a sneeze to them. To go ahead and get people to like the State Department on Facebook. I mean,
right.
Why do we have to have the State Department be liked by Facebook people?
It is $630,000.
It is. Oh, my God.
The Department of State spent $630,000 buying likes on Facebook. You can buy likes, ladies and gentlemen. By the way, for the record, our Facebook page has never spent one penny with Facebook.
Amen.
We don't do that because, to me, that's an absolute lie. Those aren't people that are really liking you. Those are people that are just...
It's all fake.
Yeah.
It's all fake. This is all a big ruse.
Same with Twitter followers.
Exactly.
It's a scam.
Like, follow, tweet, whatever. You want to go ahead and... there's no reason our government and no reason that we, as people, want people to be doing that.
Well, meanwhile, it costs $75,000 to keep the White House open for tours. So the Justice Department, the Department of State, has spent $630,000, which is 7 weeks worth of 8 weeks worth of White House tours. Kept that, or has malfeasantly spent 8 weeks worth of White House tours on Facebook likes. How's that?
$50,000 a month.
Do the math.
Wow.
It's shameful.
Well, I just wanted to bring that up, and I like what you're talking about. This whole concept of a republic or a democracy. We're not a democracy, in that every nation, every state is a nation.
No, but I invite all of our listeners to listen when you hear politicals talking, and I want you to put down a check mark every time you hear. I want you to get a pad, and I want you to just keep it next to your television set, and as you're watching the news, I'd like you to put down a check mark for every time you hear a politician use the word our republic or the phrase our republic. Because I can tell you this right now. What you're going to find is you've got a sheet of paper that is forever blank. They never say our republic. They always say our democracy. And the reason that they do that is that is exactly the type of propaganda that I've been talking about. This is not a democracy. They know it. And they want the concept of democracy to be indoctrinated into the people's minds so that they truly believe that justice is about appeasing a gang of people. It's not. Justice is truly about the protection. And I'm going to tell you something else. And by the way, thanks for your call because we've only got minutes left.
Thanks, Michael.
I got to tell you something else about this whole Trayvon thing, which really bothers me. For the record, the role of a grand jury, as it originally envisioned, is to protect people from malicious prosecution. And this prosecutor, this woman who was brought in as a special prosecutor, due exclusively to public outcry and political reasoning, she went out and actively took this case out of the hands of a grand jury and prosecuted it anyway. Now, for the record, for those of you who are not familiar with law and how it operates, here's the way it works. You're accused of a crime by law enforcement. They then go to a grand jury and take this evidence with them to the grand jury, and they present all the evidence they have against you, and they say to the grand jury, do we have your permission? You have to vote yes or no on whether or not we have enough information here and enough evidence to get an indictment against this individual so we can officially charge him or her. At which point they do. If the grand jury says, yes, we think you've got enough evidence there, they get an indictment. An indictment is then handed over. They go out, they knock on your door, they take you away in handcuffs, they begin the investigation and the prosecution. The whole purpose, ladies and gentlemen, of a grand jury is so that a group of citizens can sit there and hear the evidence and determine whether or not there's enough factual evidence to actually indict you or whether this is all just a political game. In this case, this prosecutor, specially appointed, subverted the grand jury process. She never let it go to a grand jury. She took it back from the grand jury and prosecuted it anyway without a grand jury indictment. Now, for the record, this is one of the reasons why this trial was such an unmitigated disaster for the state. Because had a grand jury heard this, they probably would not have given charges in the first place. There would have been no indictment. But that wasn't good enough. They couldn't have the grand jury subvert their agenda. So they simply bypassed it. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is a crime in and of itself. And I got to tell you, the entire grand jury system has been subverted anyway. But even in all of its perversion and subversion from its original intent and purpose, they would still most likely have found no grounds to prosecute. For the record, did you know that the grand jury's purpose, its sole reason to live, is to protect individuals from malicious prosecution by government, state or federal or otherwise? Did you know that? I'll bet you didn't. The whole point of a grand jury is so that they can hear the evidence and say, we think this is a fishing expedition, or, yes, you've got enough evidence to move forward. Now, and I could hold an entire class on why the grand jury process has been subverted. I'm not going to do that this morning. We don't have the time for that. But what I will tell you is this. The original principles of a grand jury was that the prosecutor was not a government employee. The prosecutor was another individual who had a claim against another individual. And they have passed laws illegally to allow themselves to be the sole influence in a case. In other words, the way it works is the prosecutor goes in and he throws everything at the grand jury, evidence-wise, that they have. But you're not there to defend yourself, and there's no one there to represent you. In fact, grand juries are held in secret. So most people don't even know they're being indicted until after it's occurred. Then there's a knock on the door, and they've got a warrant for your arrest. But you see, people who are in high office write rules that make their illegal crimes legal. What's the word for that? Let me hear you say it, class. Treason. When you are in a high-placed position and have a level of authority in government, and you write rules that legalize your criminal activity, it qualifies as high crime and misdemeanor in office. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the definition of treason. And in this case, it's not just treason against your nation. This is treason against a race, treason against our species, all of humankind. What these people who are in power are doing today is treason and crimes against humanity. And the reason I say it that way is because the actions they're taking today are destroying the underpinnings of a society where rule of law is the foundational basis. They are doing everything in their power to completely and totally destroy the pillar and the foundation of the rule of law in this nation. They operate in total lawlessness, and when this country collapses, the crime is against all of humanity. Because it goes back to the caller's point that once this occurs, and the United States is no longer a restraining influence on the expansion of extraordinary evil under totalitarianism on a global scale, all of mankind will suffer. All of mankind. Once we have gone over the edge, and the United States is no longer the restraining arm, the restraining hand, the restraining influence against evil, we're finished as a planet, as a species. I make no bones about saying we are the last pillar of freedom on the planet Earth. You've heard me say it many times. It's true. We are the last pillar of freedom on planet Earth. With our restraining influence gone, with the finger pulled out of the dike, the hole will widen and grow until the dike falls. And what will occur on a global scale is a totalitarianism that the world has never imagined. You're listening to America's Voice Now. Please find us on the web at americasvoicenow.org. please find us on Facebook at facebook.com/America's Voice Now. You can find this and every other program that we do at at YouTube. That's youtube.com/America's Voice Now. If you find any of these programs that we do valuable, please make sure that you send a friend a link. Send him an email and say, hey, here's a video you ought to check out. This guy makes some sense. If you think that there are folks out there that will benefit from it who are sitting on the fence or completely on the opposite side of the fence but might respond to logic and reason, give them a shot. We'll see you tomorrow.
Battery Station in West Plains is your headquarters for getting and being prepared. Natural disasters, civil unrest, personal